Investors, I know you have questions that you should be asking a lawyer, but you won't because you're afraid it's going to cost too much money. Don't worry about it. Jen's got you. I made a whole video asking all of your questions to a Pennsylvania real estate attorney. I'm Jennifer Rowlands, landlord, educator, advocate, and broker at One Focus Property Management. Today's video is all about the questions you should be asking an attorney now. And because you're not, I did it for you. So happy to tell you we have a great interview with Brett Woodburn, principal at Woodburn Law. He's been practicing real estate law for 23 years, working in residential, commercial, even industrial applications, working with investors, large and small, realtors. He's really the Pennsylvania real estate legal expert. Additionally, he's also a certified title agent, making him incredibly valuable to your portfolio, however you want to use him. Now, this is a long video. I took all of your questions from social media and a couple of my own to ask Brett, and he gave us incredible responses. So you'll note in this video, we've built in chapters so you can look at the question that's being asked and go to that section of the video. So be sure to explore the chapters and have a great time watching Brett answer all your questions. Brett, thanks so much for joining me today. I have a ton of questions from me, my clients, and I asked on our social media channels some investors like, hey, what kind of questions do you want to ask a lawyer who's not going to send you a bill afterwards? We got a couple of those too. So Ryan and the Pennsylvania Investment Property Owner Group on Facebook, they asked, what are the pros and cons of creating an LLC and how do they create one themselves? They said, what about a trust? Do I need someone to do this for me? And if I decide to work with an attorney, how do I find and choose one? So there's a lot for you to bite off there. Tell me what you think about his question.
To start out as an investor, I think it makes a lot of sense to evaluate what sort of corporate structure they want to have. There are a couple of benefits to having the corporate ownership. Primarily, it is liability. Secondarily, from my perspective, are tax bases and how do you want to be taxed? And that's a conversation that typically, when I work with a client, particularly more sophisticated clients, I'll have a conversation with the client and with their accountant at the same time to determine what type of structure. Is it an LLC? Is it an S Corp? Is it a C Corp? Typically, those are the structures that investors are looking to use to acquire real estate because they give different flexibilities, different benefits, different detriments. Trusts, I don't see a whole lot of trusts on the business and investing side, although there are business trusts out there. Again, that's a conversation first had with the accountant to understand, based on what you want to do long-term, short-term, which structure makes sense. Can you form an entity on your own? I'll start with the typical lawyer's answer with it depends. And it depends on what you mean by forming it. Can you log on to the Corporations Bureau website and fill out the paperwork online? Absolutely. Typically, it's around $125 is what the Department of State charges to file. And yes, you can go online to the IRS website and get an employee identification number, an EIN, for the company for tax filing purposes. You can do that. I can do that. An accountant can do that. Obviously, various levels of fees involved with that. On that part of it, I don't know a whole lot of attorneys that charge big dollars with that because that is it's more of a pass-through. The other part of that, and this is where the investors can get themselves into trouble, and that's actually structuring the entity itself. Are you a corporation? If so, do you have your corporate bylaws in place? Are you an LLC? If so, do you have your operating agreement in place? How do you want to structure that? Do you want to have restrictions on transfers, who can join and who can't join, who I can sell to, who you can sell to? Do you want to put provisions in place in the event that you have an unanticipated event, someone gets sued, somebody goes to jail, somebody has a tragic accident, they die, or they're incompetent, or they go through a divorce, and now you've got ownership in an entity is personal property, and so that becomes a part of the estate of the person, whether it's someone who's died or someone that's going through the divorce. Those structures, the truth is, hiring a lawyer to help you develop that upfront is less expensive than hiring the lawyer to get you out of the mess that you got in because you bought a book in a box. Um, I can go to, I don't want to, identify any of the entities by name, but we all know who's out there that provide cheap legal resources. And the truth is you get what you pay for. And it is substantially more, it can be substantially more expensive to hire a lawyer to get you out of the problem, because now you're in a bind.
Yeah.
And you've got the law of supply and demand. You're demanding my services, I'm going to supply it to you at a premium. Or if it's
Yeah.
not at a premium, there's a lot more work involved. So a lot of times, when I'm dealing with a lot of investors, if I don't have an established relationship, it's typically because they're new to it or they've been doing it a while on their own, and they started out not knowing what they don't know. Um, I think you want to view your lawyer as part of a team, a valued member, and the part of my job that I enjoy the most is the consultative part. When I'm acting as a counselor, as someone who's giving advice, talking through things. Some of the advice falls into legal advice category. A lot of it is talking about business decisions to make and what are we thinking about. And one of the things that lawyers are trained to do is identify future problems. That's part of what we are, why we're hired. Is, am I setting this up? No one needs help when everyone's getting along. Everyone needs preparation for in the event that we don't get along. How do you find a lawyer? You can always do your Google search, you can do your online search, but two things that I would say: number one, referrals. Word of mouth is always the best source. You've got somebody who does what you do, who's been doing what you do, and they work with somebody, they know who they like, and they can make a referral. But the second part of that is, just like anybody else, do an interview. If someone's going to work with me, I'm interviewing a client as much as I expect the client to interview me. I don't work well with everybody, and not everyone works well with me. And you don't want to work with a lawyer that you don't like. It's just, you're not going to call them, and you're not going to want to deal with the headaches. So find someone that has a business philosophy that you respect. You don't want somebody that's necessarily lockstep with you, because I've got to tell you, if you're making a mistake, you can still make it. I will make suggestions, you make decisions, to coin a phrase, but I'll give you as much information as I can, and I want you to respect my position on it. If I disagree with you, I'm not going to say don't do it unless it's illegal.
Right. You gave us a lot to think about there, and your advice on finding an attorney is incredible. And I would add to that to seek a specialist. So especially if you're an investor, you don't need one attorney. You likely need access to at least two or three. I know in my business, I use two or three. And Brett, you're our real estate expert. So if it has to do with our licenses, our licenses with the state, or how we're working with clients in these real estate deals, we're coming to you. But we have employment issues, we have other civil issues, and we're dealing with that with other specialists, and that is something I find that investors I work with often make that mistake. The person who wrote the prenup is the person who did the estate, is the person who dealt with the DUI, is the person who's doing the real estate work. So that, and I want to maybe just go back, because you gave us a really great breakdown on how you work with clients in that LLC versus personal ownership and how you set this up. I'd like to just frame the question again from the perspective of a person trying to get started in the business, because I hear this all the time. Well, I need to get my LLC, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. And when we're just an individual and we're just starting in this investment journey, we want to buy one or two properties, what are the questions that person should be asking themselves or talking about with their attorney to decide how to move forward? Because there are large, sophisticated operations, and then there's just Joe, property owner, and he doesn't have a whole lot going on. What questions should he be thinking about in making that decision?
What are you looking to do in the next 3 to 5 years? That's probably the most important question to start with. Am I looking for passive income? I just want to own a handful of properties. I'm enough of a handyman, I can swing a hammer, or I've got somebody that I'm going into business with that does renovations and remodeling so they can do the work. And really, I just want to own a couple of properties just so that I've got a source of income for the next 15 or 20 years. Or am I looking to build a portfolio? What's my target over the next 5 to 7 years? I want to have 15 to 20 doors in my portfolio. Or am I looking to buy, renovate, and flip? Am I looking to serve and sell to other people to use as their primary residence, or am I looking to sell to other investors as portfolio properties? uh, because it does depend. And if you don't know, it's okay if you don't know what you ultimately want to do 5, 6, 7 years down the road, but you should have an idea of what you, if you don't know what you're going to do in the next 18 months to 2 years, don't do anything until you figure that out. Uh,
Okay.
this is a significant investment.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at something because I got to jump on this now because it's a really great deal, let me tell you something. It's not a really great deal. It's a money pit and a headache. 98% of the time, if you are not experienced and someone's trying to dump it, there's a reason they're trying to dump it.
Yeah.
So
I just heard a really interesting slogan the other day. It said, good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from poor judgment. And I can
true.
say that all the time. Like when you said, I like to counsel and I like to look ahead and I like to plan and prevent with my clients. I very much feel that from the property management standpoint. I want to prevent issues from you because I've seen more than you'll ever see.
Right.
Both my poor judgment and just watching has shown me what can go wrong. And you've always been great in your experience with us and talking through just the potential and risk and helping us analyze risk.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to understand. And again, why do you want to, sit down and talk to a lawyer before you do something? Because I'm going to think about the things that you're not thinking about, particularly if you're new to the investment. A mistake, I don't want to say mistake, that's probably the wrong word, a decision that a lot of investors, particularly early investors, make is to buy a house in their own name because the interest rate that they're going to get on the mortgage is lower than it is if you get as an investment property. That's great, except if the liability that flows with that, if somebody falls down the steps because the railing that you put on there fell apart and they suffer a catastrophic injury, that property is in your personal name. That means all of your personal assets are open. And if you bought it and if you're married and you and your spouse purchased the property, your joint property is now potentially at risk. So you want to evaluate the exposure. What's your risk tolerance? I want to protect my assets. How do I do that? I can always form an LLC later. Yes, you can, but putting property into the LLC is going to trigger realty transfer tax. Putting it into a corporation is going to trigger realty transfer tax. If you have a mortgage on the property and then I'm putting it into an entity, well, you're technically breaching the mortgage and allowing the lender to foreclose if they find out about it. Those are the things people do it all the time. Not going to tell you that they don't. My job is if you're going to do that, all right, you've already put yourself in this position. You need to think about what could happen and are you prepared? If the worst case scenario comes to pass, you're prepared to deal with it, as opposed to, well, gee, I don't even know what rates are today. I can get 6% on a residential, but it's 6.5% for commercial. That half a point means a lot of money. That's cash flow. Okay, that's true. But from a liability standpoint, if you buy it with the LLC and the only asset that the LLC has is the property, then if you're running your business like a business, and I'll touch on what that means in a second. If you're running your business like a business, then you're in a better position to cap the liability at the value of the property.
Yeah. That brings us to the next question. Singh asked in the Pennsylvania Investment Property Owners Group on Facebook, and I hear this one all the time too. Apparently Singh has bought the property in their personal name and they want to know, is there any way to put this rental property into an LLC without paying transfer tax?
No.
That's okay. No, stop trying. Okay.
You're going to pay transfer tax going into the entity, period. There are certain ways to pull it out of an LLC that could avoid realty transfer tax.
Okay.
But there's restrictions and limitations. It's not a free pass, which is why, again, meet with an accountant and a lawyer ahead of time to figure out what you're going to do over the next couple of years to ascertain whether or not the realty transfer tax it's no less than 2% in Pennsylvania. Okay. It's 1% to the state everywhere. The lowest transfer tax in Pennsylvania is 1%. I believe local transfer tax can go up to the highest I think I've heard is 4.5 or 5%.
Wow.
So add that. So that now you're looking at a total of 6% transfer tax. It can be a significant investment.
Yeah.
So
I think locally we're at 3%, I think, transfer tax around here.
Depends. It depends on the
Okay.
municipality. For example, I just did a deal in Wilkes-Barre, and if you're in Wilkes-Barre City, it was an extra percent. The property was not in the city; it was in the township, and it was only a total of 2% as opposed to 3%. So it
Okay.
really does depend on the municipality where the property is located.
Gotcha. Um, this is a very common question, one I see the fallout from all the time, but how does a new investor go about getting a lease? So they bought their property, they maybe secured a tenant, and they go, what am I going to do for a lease? So they type it into Google, maybe they copy someone else's. I call it Frankensteining. Sometimes they go out and get a bunch of leases, and they Frankenstein one together. And, I know what the answer is. We need to hire an attorney, but I want to
Or
know, what should these people be doing to avoid issues in the future?
it's one of two things in my experience. You either hire a lawyer that understands. You're talking, I think, primarily residential property.
Primarily, yeah.
Yeah, hire a lawyer that understands residential property management, property leasing requirements, or hire a skilled property manager that's a realtor or real estate licensee. Not necessarily a realtor. There's a distinction. Someone who has a real estate license, because they're going to have the licensed property manager, real estate licensed property manager is going to have resources that have well-developed tools like residential leases that have been vetted, that have been drafted. If you don't talk to an experienced property manager, you don't talk to an experienced lawyer, you're not necessarily going to be aware of the fact that there's the Plain Language Act in Pennsylvania. And if you violate the Plain Language Act, if you write things like a lawyer, it can violate the act, and that provision can be invalidated. It doesn't negate the whole lease, but it does invalidate that provision. And it's also in the act, it provides that a violation of the Plain Language Act is a violation of the Unfair Trade Practices and Consumer Protection Law, which comes with a potential of, there's a minimum of $100 damages or actual damages, but it also comes with a prospect of up to treble damages and attorney's fees if there's litigation involving around it. So it is absolutely something that you need to take advantage of. And I've represented tenants, and I've represented landlords that have had to deal with that because the lease didn't comply with the Plain Language Act. A lot of times what I do is, I have a license to use certain leasing software to develop leases, and I do it because the leases that I have access to are vetted and they are submitted for approval to the Attorney General's office, and I don't want to go through that process on a residential lease. It's not a good value add to my clients to pay me to draft a lease, then to submit it to the Attorney General's office, deal with the redlining, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Deal with one of the organizations, professional organizations that have dedicated resources to residential leases. It makes more sense to hire someone that does that. Different world in commercial. Much makes a whole lot more sense to have an attorney involved in drafting a lease in a commercial realm. Standard forms work really, really well in residential. They work really, really poorly in commercial. Just generally speaking. So, I mean, I'm an advocate of letting the real estate agent do their job. Use a real estate agent, as qualified real estate agent, to do property management for you, because that's what you do. Let me do what I do. I advise on the law. I don't want to manage your property for you. I'm going to make it too painful financially because I don't want to do it.
Yeah. It's one of those costs of doing business. And I think sometimes investors get into the rental real estate business thinking this is very, very passive and that this is quite easy, because maybe they've had very informal or casual relationships with landlords in the past and think that that works great. And as somebody who untangles landlord problems every day, I know you're doing that and I'm doing that. When I get that lease, I can almost tell you if we get into some sort of conflict with this tenant, the issues, to the point where I don't like to even enforce compliance on leases that I don't think are going to get past a judge, or at the very least, an attorney, whether it be a pro bono or a paid attorney for a tenant. And I find that newer or less experienced investors, they talk and complain a lot about their lack of success with the legal system, but they really should be talking about their lack of preparation to deal with the legal system in the line of their business. So yeah, that's speaking of leases. Where do you see investors making avoidable mistakes in their leases? What should they be focused on if they're watching this video and go, well, crud, I did write my own 10 years ago, or I got mine from the guy I know who rents property and he just emailed it to me. What should they be thinking about and focusing on to avoid the most mistakes?
They're an investor. They should be focusing on investing in property. Let somebody who handles the leasing aspect of it handle the leasing aspect of it. Don't go to the online websites. Don't Google a lease provision. Don't take someone's lease that was around 10 years ago that was crafted by a general practitioner 10 or 15 years ago. The laws change. They're constantly changing. You know, I not unlike you, Jen, when I see a lease that comes in, there's a couple places that I go to right away and I look at it and I'm like, all right, no, you don't want to go after that. You're not going to win. And if they start asking questions, you got problems. Stay away from it. But I'm not going to get my money. You're right. You're not going to get your money. So it's a cost of doing business. You know, do you want to spend $5,000 to recover $3,000? We can do that. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. Doing it yourself. You know, you can DIY a lot of home repairs. Don't DIY a legal document. And if you don't have, I've seen them from the Staples leases, Office Max, you know, in a box, Hallmark, whatever, up to the current providers that are out there. If you're not, we have, you know, staff lawyers that have vetted these leases. No, because each lease, each state is specific. Some municipalities have specific requirements. You want to know and work with somebody who understands the regional area where your property is located, because there are nuances. Some, you know, there are rental registration ordinances that are becoming more and more prevalent. You've got, I can't tell you how many times in the last 3 months I've gotten calls from people who bought property to do a short-term rental, Airbnb, VRBO, whatever the case may be, only to find out after closing, when they start marketing it, they get a notice of enforcement from the municipality saying you can't do that. No short-term rentals, anything under 30 days. Well, how, you know, my realtor didn't tell me this. Well, your realtor's not supposed to tell you that necessarily, unless you hired them specifically to find properties for that area. So I get being an investor and it's all about maximizing the return on my investment. You might be right 8 out of 10 times, but there's 2 times that you're wrong are going to cost more than the profit you made on the other 8.
Yeah, I hear that. And I hear you saying investors do the investing, leave the legal stuff to the legal people, leave the real estate management to real estate people. Yep. You really have to hone in on your special contribution, what you're bringing to the arrangement.
You think of it as a team, truly. Yeah. You know, you whether, it doesn't matter what sport you follow. If you follow any sport, even golf, you know, you get people changing caddies all the time because they don't necessarily like the, you know, they don't mesh in their thought to the, you know, their approach strategy to the game. You're spending significant money. Let people help you maximize your returns by helping you identify risk and minimizing risk. You're not going to have no risk ever. You're not going to have no expenses ever. You know, maximize your returns by identifying and controlling risk.
Totally. I very much align with that. You know, speaking of risk, a lot of investors will tell me that they like verbal leases or even month-to-month leases. And what they always tell me is, because if it's not working out, I don't want to go to court. I just want to end it and get them out of there. And I think that's novel. And I think that I get that approach to risk. It just, in my experience, doesn't work out practically. So if somebody's coming to you and giving you that opinion, what are you talking about to them?
Isn't that cute?
Oh, isn't it?
Isn't it cute that you think that way? No, it's a bigger headache. It might have been palatable in some areas prior to COVID, pre-pandemic. The whole philosophy towards keeping people in houses changed from 2020 through early 2022. It's not as easy to evict people, even though we're out of the pandemic imposed protections. There are still a lot of magisterial district judges, the local MDJs, that feel bad for tenants and are not necessarily inclined to facilitate their departure from their residence. We have an oral lease. Okay, well, prove the terms to me. Well, you know, well, it's oral. How am I going to prove that? Well, yeah. That's your problem. I mean, that's why you don't want to do it. That is exactly your problem. Yeah. You can't you've never been able to self-help. I know people that self-help all the time, depending on where the property is located, because there was a tolerance for it. The tolerance is significantly less. It's
And
never,
when you
it's
say
not easy.
self-help, you're talking about a self-help eviction, which is an eviction executed not through the court system, through intimidation, harassment,
Correct.
maybe removing doors, I've even heard of, turning off power. All those things are what's
Yep.
called self-help eviction and are strictly illegal. Big
Correct.
consequences.
That's correct. And that's when I refer you to a friend of mine that does criminal work to defend you.
Can't even get help from Brett when you self-help? No, you
No.
pass it right on along.
Yeah, it's yes, I stay out of that. I mean, you're getting into the criminal arena and there's too many other consequences. Again, I try to stay in, I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this over 20 years. I try to stay in my lane. I know I'll cross the fog line periodically, but I don't want to learn anything new at this point. I know my area of law comfortably well. I know enough to know when I don't know something. And I don't want to get out of it. I'll bring in somebody else to handle that. Just because I want to take care of the person. I want to take care of the client, and I can't always do it. And I know that I can't always do it, and I don't try anymore.
All right. Well, I'll remember that when it's time that I'll get to talk to your buddy. Jason in the Pennsylvania Investment Property Owners Group on Facebook asked how landlords should deal with requests for reasonable accommodations for support animals. And again, we're talking about the do-it-yourself landlord who's working a regular day job, has probably under 10 units, gets this request. And specifically when it comes with one of those online certificates that somebody pays maybe $100 for, they're really put on their rear when they get these requests and don't know what to do. What's your best advice to someone in that situation?
Talk to a lawyer that understands fair housing laws, period. Or if you don't want to talk to a lawyer, then simply give them the request that they're asking. And I say that because if you don't, they're going to turn around. If they know enough to go online and spend $99 to get the certificate. There is a law in place in Pennsylvania that addresses that, but it's
the Assistance Animal Integrity Act, and the biggest teeth it gives is $1,000 fine to those who use the certificate or those who issue it, right?
Correct. It's not quite toothless, but it's certainly not as helpful. I think HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, starting to come down with some guidelines, and they recently published a paper on things that a landlord can and cannot ask, should and should not ask, can and should do in those scenarios. But it's complex and it's changing, and trying to wade through it yourself is not advisable. And nobody practices law without a license better than a real estate agent does. So your property manager might tell you that, hey, we can help you with this. Again, for the property manager, stay in your lane. Right. If you don't have that Juris Doctor, if you don't have that JD, you don't have the license to practice law, don't advise somebody on fair housing laws. And I've had conversations with clients and other people in the property management community, and I don't care how well versed you are, and I don't care how right you are. You don't have the credentials to back it. You don't have the legal right to do it. Somebody that just says no, and then I'm not going to rent to you. You're looking at a fair housing claim, and that can be far more significant financially and otherwise. It can elevate, and you can get Department of Justice involved. And that's when things get really, really significant, and it can put you right out of business if you don't take it seriously. There are people out there that have needs for, and there's a difference between support and a service animal. A service animal is defined as a dog, and at the federal level, a dog and a miniature horse. No other animal falls in the service animal under the legal definition, but support animals are a much broader category. And there is some pendulum swinging back the other way as to certain things. There are restrictions. I'm not sure that you can still count a snake or a spider or a grasshopper as a service animal. You can no longer take your fowl, birds on planes. So there's some pushback.
and I've noticed that the pendulum definitely swung. It's swinging back a little bit now, and I think some of the things that our industry has been asking for, the property management industry, is just more clarity. We want more clarity because we want. I don't meet landlords who are property managers rather, who are against assistance animals. We all understand the value that these animals have to the disabled and the rights that they have to have those animals. What we're fighting back against is the broadening of this to where it's not truly necessary anymore, and it's causing property damage. And that's the thing that we're concerned about. Yeah, so I really like your advice on that. And to your point, I've taken your advice. We no longer entertain those. We have subcontracted to a company that has the attorneys, has the process, validates all those claims, and that's all they do. So we luckily have that resource, but we're managing a lot of properties here, and we want to do it the absolute right way. So of course, we approve reasonable accommodation requests that are qualified to be approved under the law as it stands today. So yeah, absolutely. That is a tough one for do-it-yourself landlords to handle without some assistance. And it's the number one thing I think they're getting caught up in pretty frequently, because even here in our market, North Central Pennsylvania, those requests in my 10 years in this market have gone up very steadily, along with the publicity around those kinds of things. What risks do you see real estate investors overestimate and underestimate?
I think they underestimate the quality of tenants, or the value that the tenants will put on their property. People need to appreciate the fact that a tenant they think it's their property, but they know it's not. They don't want you as interfering with their home, but they don't want to take care of it like it's their home. And I think individuals, investors, and particularly on the smaller scale, and newly minted investors, overestimate their own skill set in dealing with these problems. I've been watching this, and I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night, and so therefore I can handle it on my own. Maybe. Usually what I find is you get a lot of no harm, no foul. You screwed it up, you didn't do it right, you got away with it. Keep doing it that way. Eventually it's going to come home to roost, and you're going to have to pay the consequences. I get people that don't want to use me as their lawyer because I take that approach, but I'm 100% okay with that. If you're the kind of person that wants to do it yourself and kind of try to find the way around it, I'm not the right lawyer for you. There are lawyers out there that are happy to do that. But with that I think elevates your risk. I don't think it limits your risk.
Gotcha.
I
would concur. I think they significantly overestimate their abilities to not only do the practical things on an investment, the repairs or whatever, but the handling of the tenant, handling of that relationship. And it is a relationship, and it's a complex relationship that, because it's somebody's home, it's so very personal. And I always say that the landlord hears when you're sick, when there's a divorce, when you've lost your job, because we're likely the largest bill you have to pay. So when those major things happen, you often need to communicate with your landlord about what's going on. And that closeness, that intimacy of information and what we've shared can, for some investors, be too much to make good business-minded decisions in the operation of their investment. Yeah.
Right. Particularly if they're a smaller investor with a smaller portfolio, less than 10 doors. It still is, it's a personal business to them. And that's the other area where I see investors getting wrapped up. It's not uncommon for me to run into people that are now using the house they grew up in or their parents' home as an investment property, and they're still emotionally tied to that. And I try to remind people, look, you've got dirt, bricks, and sticks. That's all that is. And you need to look at it as an asset, not as a memory. If you're going to look at it as a memory, don't rent it, because nobody's going to treat it the way that you did or your parents did.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I very much concur with that. So let's talk about a more sophisticated investor, an investor who's maybe gotten past that solo operator stage and they're ready to partner, JV with other investors. And I see these people doing this all the time, very casually, at all the real estate meetups I go to. They're meeting and introducing, and I hear what they're talking and asking about. And I don't think anybody's talking about the right things. If you're at that stage in your investing career, what should you be doing from a legal perspective to not have regrets in the future?
Consult with a lawyer before you make any plans. Talk to a lawyer ahead of time. There are so many different ways to develop business structures and business ventures that can be profitable, not just monetarily, but in a business relationship way. But there are always pitfalls. There are things that you can do in the commercial arena that you can't do in the residential arena or the consumer arena. Or you can pair with a real estate licensee, a real estate agent, and to get into joint ventures with them, or with title industry, or with insurance, or property maintenance, the handyman, or the renovation company. There's so many things that are out there that work. But before you go too far down that road, and I don't think I need to be consulted when you're just thinking about doing something necessarily. I just want to go out and explore if there's any interest in the area. Okay, I can't help you. I don't know if there is or there isn't. But once you start talking to people and, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, I have a lot of clients that ask this, the more sophisticated, on the property management level. Hey, we're thinking about expanding into this particular arena that is ancillary services, that whether it's the maintenance arena, an insurance provider, move in, move out company, cleaning company, paint, take your pick. I mean, there's a whole host of different types of business ventures that are good ideas or bad ideas. After you figure out if someone's interested in doing it, but before you go down that road to entering that relationship, that's when the attorney should be brought in. And to talk about what are the risks, what's going to happen if this works, who's putting what money in, who's taking what financial risks, what's the ownership structure. The worst ownership structure you can ever have is 50-50.
Okay.
What happens when you don't agree?
Yeah. You fight to the death. You fight to the death.
You get a divorce is what
Yeah,
happens.
well, it is what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've done that. It's like, look, we're going to do 51-49. And for the important decisions, then maybe we'll require a supermajority, which effectively, if you've got two people, means unanimity. But my recommendation is always to structure it so if you've got two people, one person has the tie-breaking vote. If you've got three people, then either one person is always going to have the tie-breaking vote, or any two people are going to have the tie-breaking vote. So I look at it as, if you run into an impasse, how are you going to resolve the problem? And avoiding 50-50 is, and people do it all the time.
Sure.
And they do 50-50 all the time. And that's okay. You don't have to listen to me. I'm less problems. Usually when you listen to me, you have fewer problems. But I make a pretty good living helping people who didn't listen to me too.
So, yeah, you help us. We haven't gotten in any trouble yet, knock wood. Right. So yeah, I agree. Prevention is so much better. How about, speaking about prevention, here's a short question. Should I text my tenants?
Should you know? Will you? Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason, it just comes down to a documentation issue from my perspective. Text speak is different from human speak. It's different from email speak. You have conversations using letters and emoji. What does that mean? A great example I have in a litigation involving a sale, wasn't an investor, but the client said, we had this conversation through text message and it's clear this is what I said. And I called the client back and I said, where is this text message? You need to send it to me. And they said, I sent it to you. It's right there. Read it. And I said, well, tell you what, why don't you read it to me out loud? Because I'm not seeing what you're talking about. And they, in a very succinct and smug start, they started reading the text and then their voice trailed off. And they said, oh, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say. Your recollection of what you wrote is not going to be the same as what you actually did write. So if you're going to do it, I know you're going to do it. Make sure that you've got a process in place to back up the texts. Many times a phone will crash or a computer will crash, and that is essentially gone. Okay. Or the cost to try to recover the actual words is enormous. You see it on, pick your TV show. They're able to recover these. Well, all right, that's Hollywood. Or even if, I'm an ID junkie, information discovery channel. I love the true crime stuff. I don't practice it. That's why I enjoy it. But I have seen where they do recover. The police are able to recover, the FBI are able to recover the actual text that was exchanged. What they don't ever talk about is how long it took and what the cost of getting it. And law enforcement gets things at a different price than, if you've got a subpoena from a judge telling Verizon to provide this, and Verizon's going to provide it. If I want it, Verizon's going to say, this is how much it's going to cost. You need to pay it up front.
Right.
So I hate it, but I know that there's no way around it. Stay away from instant messages, please. There's no good way to keep that. I can screenshot it. Yeah, but you're not going to. Snapchat. Okay, great. How do we avoid getting caught? That's Snapchat.
Yeah. A couple good things I've learned, because we do text our tenants. Our software came with it when we adopted this software about 10 years ago, and I, for the longest time, kept it turned off. I didn't want texting with tenants. And, time has moved on, technology has moved on, and we are aiming to meet our tenants and residents where they are, including our owners. They also enjoy text. They like that convenience. But our software is containing every single text in an easily downloadable format, what phone number it's coming from, time and date. And we have a policy here where everything's done in writing. So any changes are always done in writing. We won't make any changes to your lease without it ever being done in writing. And we have a policy of documenting. So if I have a phone conversation with you and maybe we talk about your intent to move, some issue with your property, we will then follow it up with an email saying, great, we had this conversation today. And it's not a big deal because we're already documenting our conversation for internal purposes anyway. So just converting it to an email to say to the person, hey, this is what we talked about. I'm just documenting and I'm accountable to what I said, right? And I'm asking you to be accountable. Tremendous difference in how people treat you. And I can't say that in front of judges. It's amazing in front of judges, but that's not why I do it. I do it to get compliance so that people know, oh, hey, this person's willing to communicate in writing about these things and be held accountable, and probably hold me accountable too.
100% agree with that approach. Using the software is fine, but I think another policy that has to be in place for people that do that is a requirement that as to what phones their staff are using. Or
that's
however
so funny. Because we're not using phones. We're using our software. So it's in the computer. So we would interact with, on our end, it's like email. Okay.
So, but what happens if one of your employees actually does text through a phone? Is your software capturing that?
No, that would be against company policy, but that is a great point, because we were, I bought a business. I didn't have a problem with the business I started, but when I bought a business, those tenants, owners and whatnot were communicating directly with the staff via personal emails, personal cell phones, Facebook messaging. And I put a stop to all of that because I found it to be a pretty risky policy for my business, that business transactions were being discussed on platforms I didn't control.
Correct.
Yeah. And when I freed the employees from this personal contact, they were really reticent to ever give it up again.
Yeah, it just really comes down to enforcement on your side and training your people, but training your landlords and tenants as well. Not allowing them to break protocol.
That's right.
And when you set expectations and you hold people to the expectations, you might lose some people initially, but usually if you're losing those people, either they'll come back or they were good riddance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a big help in our business to adopt these policies, the trainings that you mentioned. That has helped tremendously, I think, in getting the compliance that we get before it becomes a big problem. So let's just chat about eviction proceedings. So a common scenario, because people don't call me when the rent's paid and everything's going great. They call me when they're in trouble. And I'll get the phone call that says, oh, tenant hasn't paid in several months. Excuse, reason, process. And they're avoiding and postponing proceeding with eviction because they believe it's very expensive. They don't believe they're going to be successful. And what I want to know from you. So if you're in a bar and you're talking to an investor and they're like, yeah, they haven't paid rent in 5 months, but I haven't done this. I tell them you can't afford not to evict them, but I also don't know what to tell them, what to expect for when you hire an attorney, what it might cost, like what you might be in for when you hire someone to help with a situation like that.
Well, that kind of comes back with, go back to the beginning conversation and hiring an attorney that is familiar with the area of law and works as a team with you. I can't tell you what an attorney is going to charge, because attorneys charge different things for different reasons. Some will charge hourly, some will charge flat fees, some will charge fees based on volume. All of those are viable ways to do it. You're not going to get, well, let me say it a different way. The likelihood of getting an attorney willing to do it on a contingency fee is ridiculously low, because what are you getting?
Yeah.
It's the contingent. Everybody thinks that's the way attorneys make money. It's not the way attorneys make money. That's the way personal injury lawyers make money. You're getting pain and suffering. You're getting big dollar settlements, and it makes sense to do it that way. I work with different clients in different ways in how we set up the fees, and it's a conversation.
Okay.
I have the way that I prefer to do it. I have ways that I won't do it.
Okay.
But in between, there's a lot of options that we can talk about. If you're going to ask me to handle an eviction case and I'm going to have to drive 3 miles or 4 miles to the MDJ, I'm going to charge you one thing. If I got to go across the river, I'm going to charge you something else. And if I've got to go more than an hour, I'm going to charge you still something else.
Sure.
Is it expensive? Well, that depends on what your tolerance level for expense is, but I would say from a legal perspective, a cost perspective at the MDJ level on an eviction, no, they're not expensive as far as legal processes go. Um, Things that you need to take into consideration, Pennsylvania is a pay and stay state. So if your claim is, I want them out because they haven't paid rent, well, if they pay the rent, they get to stay. Um, Conversations I've had with clients is, don't go for the past due rent, go for an eviction. They breached the lease. It's not a pay and stay situation. Well, what about my money? You're not going to get it. Well, I don't want to go for that. Well, all right. If they pay current, do you want them to stay? No, I want them gone. All right. Well, if they pay you current and you go after the money, they're going to stay. And if you go after the money and they can't pay you, are you going to get you're going to win, you're going to get possession, or you're going to get the money from them anyway? Well,
Right.
no, because they can't afford the rent. So let's think about it from a practical standpoint. What's more important, is it possession, or do you have somebody that you think is just, they're a decent tenant, but they're going through a tough time, they need a little kick in the pants to get back on? So you just have to evaluate it, and there's no one answer on what the right
Okay.
way to do it is. It's going to be, individual dependent. I'm renting to a family member and I don't want to evict them because I don't want them to be homeless. Okay, you've lost a lot of negotiating power, but we can still do some things. I just need to turn over bodies. I need to have this place occupied and making money, meaning people paying rent. Then we approach it a different way, and we talk about it. Even if you said, this is what I want to do all of the time, always makes me chuckle, because after you say, I'm going to do this 100% of the time, then you're going to follow accept. So it's never 100% of the time. So we treat each one, I don't want to say uniquely, but it's conversation with the person who's calling me. How do you want to handle this? Or what do you want to do? How do you want to do this?
So I think investors are sometimes intimidated to even make that call. So let me ask for them. If I'm Joe Investor and I've got a tenant who hasn't paid me rent in 4 months, and I'm kind of coming alert to the fact that it isn't coming, whatever excuses I've been accepting aren't true or aren't coming to fruition, and I'm watching this video right now, can I call Brett Woodburn and have a short conversation about my situation and get your kind of pricing and prognosis about how you could help me handle that? That's reasonable and what we should be doing?
I think what you'll have, I want to kind of tiptoe around this one a little bit,
Okay.
because again, every lawyer is going to handle it a little bit differently. I think what would be a reasonable expectation is for someone to, whether they're picking up the phone to call me or any other lawyer and I would suggest, before calling me, call someone that's geographically proximate to where the properties are, because I'm not going to necessarily understand what's going on in your municipality if you're in Northwest Pennsylvania or Southeast Pennsylvania. I don't live there. I don't deal, not that I can't do it, but I don't know the nuances, and I'm happy to help on a macro level, but on a micro level, I might not be the right person to talk to. But I think what's reasonable to expect when you call a lawyer, and this is what I would recommend an approach to be, is I want to hire you for a consultation. What are you going to charge for an hour? Now, I want to have a conversation with you and get a general idea of what I can do, and I'm willing to pay you for your time because I know my time is my commodity. And so I get a lot of people that call and ask for free legal advice. And I've gotten better as I've gotten older in not doing that for a couple of reasons. And one of the primary reasons, so everybody that sees this understands, if we have a conversation and you think that I'm acting as your lawyer, then I may have legal duties to represent you. And I'm not thinking that I'm your lawyer, and you're not paying me. And if I don't have a fee agreement with you, I can't force you to pay me. So if we're going to have a conversation, I'm going to establish a relationship. If you don't want me to talk about this with somebody else, if you want to have the opportunity to declare privilege, and the scope of privilege is narrow, it's not broad like everybody thinks. It's
Okay.
narrow. But if you even want to have the hope of declaring that attorney-client privilege, it means you have to hire me. And if you're thinking, well, I just want to call and have a quick question answered, and I don't want to pay for it. All right, free advice is about worth what you pay for it. You ask for free advice, you get free advice. You didn't pay for anything, you don't get anything for value. And if I don't know you, I am not inclined to have a conversation with you unless you're willing to pay me for my time.
Sure.
We may end up being on the phone for a minute, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and find out very quickly that I can't help you, or I'm not the right person, or you're asking me questions that I'm not capable of answering. I'm not going to charge you. I'm not going to charge you for that. We haven't had a legal conversation. You haven't drawn on my knowledge.
Right.
Other attorneys may or may not. I'm not speaking for anybody else. But if you want to talk to me and pick my brain, then I'm going to charge you an admission fee.
Yeah. And I do that with you when I have ideas or things that I want to talk about. I really do call my attorneys, and I am happy to pay those bills. Those are great bills. They're not terrible. It's usually under an hour. And I've gotten a lot of education, and I've learned a lot to fuel my business. And having that connection, because we know each other, because we've been working together, means I have access to that information. And so I would tell investors, when you think about your team, we underestimate the lawyer. We think, oh, only if it gets really bad, lawyers are really expensive. And oh, that's something rich people have. And I'm always telling you, no. Smart people have access to attorneys. And that is invaluable when you're going through these issues.
Risk management and risk mitigation is less expensive than fixing it after it's happened.
Oh my goodness,
it's anyway 30% less is a fair estimate.
Easily.
If I'm fixing a problem, it's going to cost 3 times to fix it would have cost you to avoid it, or minimize
and you sleep
the
at
exposure.
night. I sleep at night. I mean, the expense is great. But for me personally, kind of like how you said, I'm the kind of lawyer who isn't looking to get around things or use loopholes. And that's how I actually introduce myself to new attorneys. I go, hey, I'm the kind of person who's not looking for a loophole. I like to keep it clean and neat, black and white, on the right side of things. And I've found, luckily, people who align with me on that and have done a great job advising us. And I would say, up your legal budget, investors. You should be spending a little money there to build your business. And the last question I have is, what do you wish investors were calling and asking you about? Where do you think you could be bringing more value that you're not getting the opportunity to as much as you'd like?
Portfolio development. It's part of my practice is also as a title agent and helping people acquire properties, not just negotiating on the contracts, not fixing problems, not drafting leases, but helping them purchase properties. I enjoy that aspect of it. I can bring some different value on a long-term strategy to the table if I understand what your investment practices are. Where do you want to grow? What areas do you want to develop in? And yes, I'm going to make money on the title side of it as well. It's more efficient, so there is value to me. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. But that's more on the counsel side and the team development side. If I know what you're doing, I'm in a better place to say, hey, you're going this direction. Is there a new practice or something drop in your lap? Or if you're going down a different road, I'm in a better position to say, do we need to talk about something or not? And if we don't, we don't. I'm not out there looking for, I don't create, and this, but other people who haven't worked with me don't. I don't try to create work for myself. I've got plenty. I'm fortunate that I have a practice that keeps me busy. I don't need to create work. But by the same token, I view my role as a counselor is to say, hey, are you aware of this? Hey, what are you doing? What are you looking to do in this? Because this is a little different than what we've done before. So to be brought in, and I do have investors on the higher end commercial stuff that a lot of times they'll go in and they'll do the preliminary negotiations, put together a letter of intent. Usually they'll give me the letter to review before they sign it. Not always. We can spend another hour talking about letters of intent. Everyone says, but it's not a contract. Well, okay. I can call a bologna sandwich a ham sandwich. It doesn't mean I'm right. So you can create yourself a problem by signing a letter of intent that's super specific. You can create a contract by accident.
Right.
So that's what I'd like to say. I'd like to be viewed more as a team member, a valuable consultant that can help with the development and growth of your practice, rather than someone that just comes in, to fix a problem after things have gotten really, really bad.
That is my also preferred thing. I wish people would call me before they got started, have a conversation, and if they have goals that align with the way One Focus works, I can be a great advisor, or we can be great advisors through that process, versus you trying to build this on your own with no real skills or experience, and then when it inevitably kind of falls apart, coming to look for help. And of course,
Right.
that just costs money. It just costs money, whether you're paying a property manager, you're paying a lawyer, whatever it is. Brett, thank you so much for all of the time you've given us. This has been an incredible conversation. We got all of our questions answered, and I'm taking away that we don't have to be fearful of calling our attorneys or calling attorneys in general. Yeah, there's no reason to think that we're going to go broke just because we're seeking expert professional help for our business and for our lives. So thank
Could
you
be
so
quite
much,
the opposite.
Brett. Oh,
we could help you not get broke. If you get yourself in a lawsuit, you could, if we can help you avoid the lawsuit, we can save you money.
Yeah, because nobody's winning. Even when you win a lawsuit, nobody's won.
Just the lawyers.
Just the lawyers. Well, on that note, Brett, thanks so much for your time today.
Bet, Jen. Thanks.
Getting expert advice is never something to take lightly. You've gotten a ton of fantastic advice in today's video, and I hope that you'll apply it. If you ever need help with real estate management in Williamsport, Lock Haven, or Danville, or the surrounding areas of Pennsylvania, I hope you'll call One Focus Property Management. And if you have questions that are appropriate for Brett Woodburn at Woodburn Law, I hope you'll get in touch with him as well. In the meantime, give us a like, a subscribe, or ask a question on the video. We'd love to interact more.